My name is Raymond Bishop. I am 70 years old, and this is the story of how I disappeared from my own life. My daughter, my only child, told me to shut up at the dinner table so her husband could explain how he wanted to take my home. They saw me as a relic, an obstacle in the path of their ambition. So I stood up, took my keys, and walked out forever. They thought I was just an old man throwing a tantrum. They had no idea I was about to legally dismantle their entire world piece by piece until the very ground they stood on was no longer theirs. Before I tell you how I orchestrated their downfall, let me know in the comments where you're listening to this from. And please hit like and subscribe if you believe that a parent's love should never be treated as an entitlement. The faint scent of oak from the dining table, a table I built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago, was usually a source of comfort. Tonight it smelled like a coffin. My son-in-law Trevor was in the middle of his grand performance, waving his hands around like a magician about to pull a rabbit from a hat. He wasn't pulling out a rabbit, though. He was trying to pull the roof from over my head. "It's not just an app, Ray," he said, using my first name in that condescending way that always made my skin crawl. "It's a revolution in the real estate investment ecosystem. We're democratizing access to premium portfolios through AI-driven blockchain technology." He used a lot of big words. Ecosystem, blockchain, synergy, disruption. They buzzed in the air like hollow, annoying flies. I looked at my daughter Chloe. Her eyes were shining, not with understanding, but with a blind, desperate adoration. She looked at Trevor as if he were the second coming of Steve Jobs. All I saw was a modern-day snake oil salesman. The real purpose of this sermon, once you stripped away all the fancy packaging, was brutally simple. He wanted me to sign a piece of paper that would put my house up as collateral for his business idea. The house that my late wife Vivian and I had poured our blood, sweat, and savings into. He wanted to turn our legacy into seed money for a fantasy scribbled on a few glossy pages. I let him finish. When his waterfall of words finally trickled to a stop, I set my fork down. The clink of metal on ceramic was sharp and loud in the sudden silence. "That market is already saturated," I said, my voice even and calm. "What's your plan to compete?" Trevor blinked, his practiced smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "We have a proprietary algorithm, Ray. It can predict market trends with 95% accuracy." "No algorithm is 95% accurate," I replied. "There are always variables you can't account for. A recession, a pandemic, a change in interest rate policies. What's your liquidity risk? If the market freezes, how do investors get their money out?" I wasn't asking to be difficult. I was asking because I had lived long enough to know that a plan without a backup for failure isn't a plan, it's a prayer. Trevor's confidence began to crack. He glanced at Chloe, a silent plea for backup. "You don't get it," he said, a note of irritation in his voice. "This is new tech. It doesn't play by the old rules. Money always plays by the old rules, Trevor." I said, "It demands caution and common sense." "What is your plan B if the algorithm fails and people lose everything?" Silence. He didn't have a plan B. His handsome face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. He was used to charming people, not being questioned by an old carpenter who smelled of sawdust and varnish. That's when Chloe intervened. She didn't look at me. She placed her hand on Trevor's arm, a gesture of solidarity. "Dad, stop," she said, her voice sharp. "Trevor has done his research. I'm just asking necessary questions, Chloe. This is a big decision." "No," she snapped, and this time she turned to face me, her eyes cold and distant. "You're trying to embarrass him." And then came the words, delivered without hesitation, without remorse. "Shut up, Dad. Nobody cares about how they built houses in the Stone Age. Just listen. Shut up." "Dad." The words were like nails driven into my chest. The air left my lungs. Trevor, instead of defending me or calming his wife, just smirked. He had won. In that single, shattering moment, I saw everything with perfect clarity. I saw the months of rent I'd covered when Trevor had a cash flow problem. I saw the expensive vacations I had paid for. I saw the brand new SUV Chloe was driving, a birthday gift from me. For years I had given and they had taken. They didn't see it as love, they saw it as their due. My sacrifice wasn't a gift, it was an obligation. And now that I had finally drawn a line, I had become a nuisance. A fossil from the Stone Age. I didn't say another word. What was the point to argue? To try and explain to them that a 70-year-old man's dignity was worth more than a fantasy app they wouldn't understand. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. My bones ached in protest, but I stood tall. I folded my linen napkin, the kind Vivian had loved, and placed it neatly beside my unfinished plate. I turned and walked toward the front hall. "Dad, don't be so dramatic," Chloe called after me, her voice laced with annoyance. "We're not finished talking." I didn't look back. I took my old wool coat from its hook. I reached for the keys to my truck. The jingle of the metal was the only sound in the house. I opened the front door. The cold night air rushed in a welcome shock after the suffocating atmosphere inside. Dad Chloe's voice had a hint of panic in it now. Perhaps she was realizing this wasn't one of my usual moods, but it was too late. I stepped outside and pulled the heavy door shut behind me. The solid click of the deadbolt sounded like a final punctuation mark, the end of my patience, the end of my role in their lives. I got into my old Ford F-150, the truck that had seen me through 1,000 job sites. The engine turned over with a familiar, reliable rumble. I didn't look at the house in the rearview mirror as I backed out of the driveway. I just drove away into the darkness. They thought I was just going for a drive to cool off. They had no idea I was driving out of their lives for good. I didn't just drive aimlessly. A plan was already forming in my mind, as clear and cold as the stars in the night sky. I drove to a Holiday Inn on the edge of town, a place clean enough, anonymous enough. The young man at the front desk gave me a key card without a second glance. To him, I was just another traveling salesman or a husband in the doghouse. He wasn't entirely wrong. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. It was sterile and impersonal, yet I felt a strange sense of peace. There were no family photos on the walls staring back at me, no pieces of furniture imbued with memories, just silence. The boiling anger I had felt at the dinner table had cooled, hardening into a solid block of resolve. I didn't feel hurt anymore. Oddly, I felt free, as if a great weight I didn't even know I was carrying had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping beneath me. I pulled my worn leather wallet from my back pocket. I'd had it for 30 years. I opened it, bypassing the credit cards and my driver's license, and went to the small hidden flap where I kept my most valuable possession. A photograph of Vivian. It was old, the corners soft and rounded from years of being carried with me. She was smiling, a brilliant, life-giving smile that could light up the darkest room. The picture was taken the day we broke ground on the house. She was standing on the empty lot, her hands on her hips, her hair blowing in the wind. She was more than my wife. She was my partner, my conscience. A memory washed over me, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. Standing on that very patch of dirt, Vivian had taken my hand, her palm fitting perfectly into my calloused one. "Ray," she had said, her voice full of warmth and steel. "Look at this. It's not just wood and bricks. It's our legacy. It's where our children will grow up. It's where we will grow old. It's a symbol of everything we've worked for." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Promise me something. Never let anyone disrespect it. Never let anyone treat it like it's cheap. Not even our own children. They have to learn to respect the foundation they stand on." I had made that promise. But over the years, out of love for Chloe, out of a desire to see her happy, I had let that promise fade. I had allowed disrespect to creep into our home, one small compromise at a time. A sarcastic comment here, an unreasonable demand there. I thought I was being a loving father. Vivian would have called it what it was, weakness. "I'm sorry, Viv," I whispered to the photograph. I let it go on for too long. Her smile in the picture seemed to answer me. "Then it's time to make it right, Raymond." And I knew what I had to do. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a course correction. A re-establishment of boundaries that had been erased long ago. I took the smartphone Chloe had bought me for Christmas out of my pocket. The screen lit up with dozens of missed calls and notifications. I didn't read them. I knew what they would say. Accusations, impatient questions. I held down the power button until the screen went black. Then, just to be sure, I popped the back off and took out the battery. The feeling was liberating. I walked to the window and looked down at the empty parking lot. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. They thought I had nowhere else to go. They were wrong. I could go anywhere, because a home isn't a building. A home is where your dignity is respected, and I had just left a place that was no longer my home. The next morning in their expensive stainless steel kitchen, the mood wasn't one of worry. It was one of pure annoyance. "He still hasn't turned his phone on," Chloe would be saying, stabbing at her own phone's screen with an angry finger. "I can't believe this. He's 70 years old and he's acting like a teenager." Trevor, sipping his espresso, would be looking bored. I told you, babe. He's just trying to get attention. But we need him to sign the loan application by Friday, Chloe would wail. The investors are waiting. Without that seed money, the whole project falls apart. He'll be back, Trevor would say, though perhaps with a little less certainty than before. Where's he going to go? He'll check into a hotel for a night cool-off and come home with his tail between his legs. Just leave him be. The more we call, the more he'll dig his heels in. Chloe would sigh, the frustration clear on her beautiful face. All this over a few stupid questions about a plan B. Who even thinks about things like that anymore? They would talk about me as if I were a broken appliance and inconvenience messing up their perfect plans. Not for 1 second would they stop and ask themselves, why was Dad so angry? What did we say that was so wrong? Their self-awareness was zero. Their world revolved entirely around what they wanted, and anyone who stood in the way was either an enemy or an idiot. Trevor would put his cup down. Look, I'll handle it. I'll send him a text. Keep it light. Just remind him what's at stake. He would pick up his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. A moment later, Chloe's phone would ding as she was copied on the message. The text would read, "Hey Dad, hope you've cooled off. Just a reminder we have the appointment with the bank on Friday to finalize the paperwork. This is really important for Chloe's future. Let us know where you are." Not a single word of apology. Not one question about how I was feeling. Just a manipulative reminder of my duty. They didn't understand that this text in its cold transactional cruelty was the final brick in the wall between us. It solidified my resolve. They didn't want a father. They wanted an ATM. And as of last night, this machine was permanently out of service. After a long sleepless night on a mattress that wasn't my own, I opened my old leather duffel bag. It's the same bag I've carried to job sites for 40 years, smelling faintly of sawdust and varnish. My smartphone, the one Chloe insisted I get, lay dead on the nightstand, a useless glass brick. But I reached past my spare clothes and my shaving kit, my hands searching for something else. My fingers closed around a small, heavy object wrapped in an old polishing cloth. I unwrapped it. It was an old Nokia, what the kids call a brick phone. Chloe always laughed at me for keeping it charged in my glove compartment. She called it my dinosaur phone, but she forgot something about dinosaurs. They were built to last. This phone wasn't smart. It couldn't browse the internet or track my location. But it could do one thing perfectly: make a call. It was a tool, not a toy. A symbol of a world built on solid connections, not fleeting digital ones. I pressed the power button. The screen glowed to life with a familiar green light displaying a full battery bar. Of course it was full. I was always prepared. I scrolled through the tiny contact list. There were only 5 names in it. My late wife's old number, which I could never bring myself to delete. My mechanic, my doctor, my sister in Atlanta, and Darnell Jackson. I pressed the call button. The phone emitted a series of loud electronic beeps as it rang, a sound from a bygone era. After the 3rd ring, he picked up. "Hello?" His voice was sharp, professional. "Darnell, it's Raymond Bishop." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, a flicker of surprise. "Mr. Bishop, sir, is that you? I didn't recognize the number." "It's me, son. I'm calling you on an old phone." "Don't worry, I'm all right. I'm not in any trouble." I wanted to reassure him of that first. I didn't want him thinking I was in a ditch somewhere. My voice was steady, calmer than I had felt in years. "Listen, I need your help with a legal matter." "Of course, Mr. Bishop. Anything. Is everything okay? Is Chloe all right?" He knew our family. He knew Chloe was my world, or at least she used to be. He was a good kid, sharp as a tack. His father, Marcus, had been my best friend for 30 years before he passed. We'd worked countless jobs together, shared beers after long days, and watched our children grow up. Before he died, Marcus had made me promise to look out for his son. And when Darnell was struggling to pay for law school, I made sure he didn't have to worry about it. It wasn't charity. It was an investment in a good man. "Chloe is fine," I said, the words tasting like a small lie in my mouth. "This is about me. Your father, he was the best friend a man could ask for, Darnell. He always told me if I ever needed a sharp legal mind that I could trust, I should call his son. Well, I'm calling." I could almost hear the shift in Darnell's posture through the phone. He went from concerned neighbor to focused lawyer in a split second. "I'm here for you, Mr. Bishop. Whatever you need, just tell me." This was the first move on the chessboard, and it had to be precise. I wasn't going to unload the whole story of the dinner, the disrespect. That wasn't necessary. He didn't need emotion. He needed instructions. I'm at a point in my life where I need to get my affairs in perfect order. I began choosing my words with care. I need a comprehensive top-to-bottom review of all my assets. Everything. The deed on my house, all personal and joint bank accounts, any and all business entities registered in my name or my late wife's name. I want a complete financial and legal snapshot of my life. And Darnell? I paused, letting the weight settle on my next word. It needs to be completely confidential. He was quiet for a moment, processing. He was smart enough to know that a man doesn't wake up one morning and demand a secret audit of his own life without a powerful reason. He didn't ask why. He asked the right question. Confidential from whom, sir? From everyone, I said, my voice firm. For now, this is between you and me only. Can you do that for me? I need to know exactly what I own, what I control, and where everything stands on paper. Yes, sir, he said without a hint of hesitation. The loyalty in his voice was a balm on the raw wound from last night. I can absolutely do that. I'll start immediately. I can clear my schedule for this afternoon. Tomorrow morning is better, I said. 10 o'clock, the little coffee shop on Elm Street, the Daily Grind. It's quiet there. I'll be there at 9:45, he confirmed. And Mr. Bishop? Yes, son. Whatever is going on, he said, his voice lowering slightly. I'm in your corner. My dad would have wanted it that way. I closed my eyes. For the first time since I walked out that door, I felt like I wasn't entirely alone. I know he would have, I said. Thank you, Darnell. I ended the call. The first piece was now in motion. As I ended the call and placed the old phone on the nightstand, the silence of the hotel room felt different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with purpose. I replayed Darnell's reaction in my mind. There was no hesitation in his voice, no suspicion. He didn't ask if I was in my right mind. He didn't ask if I was overreacting. He simply heard the need in my voice and responded with unwavering loyalty. He asked the right questions, the ones a good lawyer would ask, but his tone was that of a son, not just an attorney. His final words about what his father would have wanted struck a deep chord within me. For years, I had poured my loyalty into a vessel that had a hole in the bottom, my love and support draining away without a second thought. But the bond I had forged with his father, Marcus, a bond of brotherhood and mutual respect, had outlasted death itself. It had passed down to his son. In that moment, I knew I had made the right call. The first step in taking back my life wasn't an act of anger, but an act of trust. And Darnell had proven that my trust was well placed. The Daily Grind was a place I'd been to 100 times before. It was aggressively average, with worn wooden tables, the constant hiss of an espresso machine, and the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. It was a place for college students to study and for neighbors to gossip. It was the perfect cover. This wasn't a family meeting. This wasn't a friendly chat. This was a business transaction, and the location needed to be neutral, public, and utterly forgettable. I saw Darnell through the window before I even walked in. He was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, a briefcase on the chair beside him. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was just watching the door, waiting. He wore a crisp, dark suit, a stark contrast to the casual attire of everyone else in the cafe. He looked like a soldier waiting for his commanding officer. When I walked in, he stood up immediately, a gesture of respect that felt both old-fashioned and deeply reassuring. I nodded for him to sit back down as I ordered a black coffee from the counter. I didn't want any fancy lattes. I wanted something simple, strong, and straightforward, just like the conversation we were about to have. When I sat down opposite him, the space between us felt less like a coffee table and more like a battlefield being drawn up. The casual chatter of the cafe faded into the background. In our small corner, the air was still and charged with a quiet intensity. I took a slow sip of the black coffee. It was bitter, but it was honest. I put the cup down and looked directly at Darnell. His notepad was open, his pen was ready. He was waiting for me to talk about wills and power of attorney. He was expecting a simple, sad story about an old man worried about his future. I decided to start somewhere else entirely. Darnell, I said, my voice low and even. When you look at me, what do you think I'm worth? He was taken aback, as I knew he would be. He shifted in his chair. Mr. Bishop, I don't think of it like that. You're a respected man. Your home... Exactly, I interrupted, but not unkindly. The house. Everyone thinks my life's work is summarized by that one piece of property on Oak Street. A nice house, a paid-off mortgage, maybe a little nest egg in the bank for retirement. That's the picture I've allowed the world to see. It's the picture I've allowed my own daughter to see. I reached down and lifted the old worn manila folder onto the table. It wasn't a fancy legal binder. It was soft at the edges from years of handling. I slid it across the table toward him. "Open it." He looked at me for a second, then opened the clasp and pulled out the first few pages. His eyes scanned the top of the first page. I saw his eyebrows raise just slightly. He was a professional, he kept his composure, but I saw the flicker of surprise. The document was the Articles of Incorporation for a limited liability company dated 1982. Bishop Legacy Holdings, LLC, he read aloud softly. I wasn't aware of this. Nobody is, I said. That was the point. When Vivian and I got married, I was just a carpenter. A good one, but still just working for wages. Vivian, she was a bookkeeper at a small accounting firm. She was the one with the real vision. She saw that my skill wasn't just in building things for other people. The real power was in owning the things that were built. So we made a pact. Every job I took, every house I framed, every kitchen I remodeled, we took 20% of the profit off the top. Before we paid our own bills, before we bought groceries, 20% went straight into this company. I leaned back, letting him absorb the information. Vivian managed the investments. She was a genius. She didn't gamble on the stock market. She bought things we could see and touch. A small duplex in a neighborhood people were ignoring back in '85. A commercial storefront during the downturn in the early '90s that everyone was trying to get rid of. We bought land. We bought blue-chip stocks when the market panicked and everyone else was selling. For 40 years, we quietly built an empire, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, all inside this folder. I paused and took another sip of coffee. We never told Chloe. It wasn't to be cruel. It was a test. We wanted her to find her own way to learn the value of a dollar earned through her own sweat. We wanted to see what kind of person she would grow into without the poison of a large inheritance hanging over her head. Vivian always used to say, "Money doesn't build character, Ray. It just reveals it." And I'm afraid this whole situation with her husband has revealed a character in my daughter that I no longer recognize. A character that Vivian would be deeply ashamed of. I leaned forward again, my voice dropping even lower. They think I'm a broke old man sitting on a single asset. They think my net worth is tied up in that one house, a house they can easily manipulate me out of to fund their ridiculous schemes. I tapped the folder with my index finger. They are wrong. That house on Oak Street isn't my biggest asset, Darnell. In fact, it's not even technically my house. Darnell looked up from the papers, his eyes wide now. The professional mask had finally slipped. "What do you mean, sir?" "The house belongs to the holding company," I said, delivering the first real blow. "Vivian and I transferred the deed into the LLC 30 years ago. I am the primary resident, yes. But legally, on paper, I'm just a tenant in a property owned by my own corporation." I let the weight of that statement hang in the air between us. "So when I told you I needed a review of my assets, I wasn't talking about my pension. I was talking about this, Bishop Legacy Holdings. I need to know every right, every tool, every legal weapon this company gives me. I built a fortress with my own two hands, Darnell, and now I need you to show me how to defend it." I finished speaking and let the story settle in the space between us. For a long moment, Darnell didn't say a word. He just sat there looking down at the simple manila folder, as if it were a holy text. He slowly picked up the Articles of Incorporation again, his fingers tracing the 40-year-old signature of my late wife. He let out a slow, quiet breath, a sound that was part exhale, part whistle of pure astonishment. The young, respectful lawyer who had sat down with me was gone. In his place was a man looking at a ghost. He finally lifted his head, and the expression in his eyes was one I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. It was awe. "Mr. Bishop," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been practicing law for 6 years. I've worked on multi-million-dollar corporate accounts. I've seen complex estate planning from some of the wealthiest families in the state. And I have never, ever seen anything this brilliant. This isn't an investment portfolio. This is a fortress. 40 years of silent, disciplined, strategic planning hidden in plain sight." For the first time, he looked at me, not as the kind old man who used to give him candy when he was a boy, but as a master chess player who had just revealed a checkmate that had been set up since the first move of the game. He shook his head slightly in disbelief. All this time, you lived so simply. No one could have ever guessed. A small, sad smile touched my lips. That was the design. My daughter sees an old man. Her husband sees a walking bank account with only one branch. They have no idea. Darnell leaned forward, his voice filled with a newfound energy, the thrill of a complex legal challenge. So when they threatened you, when they pushed you for the house, they weren't just pushing against you, they were pushing against this. He tapped the folder. They have no idea what they're up against. No, son. I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. They don't. They see an old tree they think they can cut down for firewood. They have no idea about the root system that runs underneath the entire forest. The awe in Darnell's eyes slowly receded, replaced by a look of intense focus. He closed the manila folder and pushed it back toward my side of the table. He was no longer looking at the past. He was looking at the future, at the fight to come. Okay, he said, his voice now crisp and commanding. They've shown their hand. Now we need to make our first move. It can't be a big one. Not yet. We need something small, precise. A warning shot. I nodded, taking a sip of my now cold coffee. What do you have in mind? He leaned forward, lowering his voice even further, though no one was paying us any attention. Before we build our defense, Mr. Bishop, we need to stop supplying the other side with ammunition. We have to cut off their resources. The joint checking account you share with Chloe, you told me you deposit money into it every month for her expenses. Is that correct? $5,000 a month. I confirmed, a bitter taste in my mouth that had nothing to do with the coffee. For her car payment, her insurance, other things. Since she married Trevor, the other things have become a lot more expensive. It's time to close that door. Darnell set his gaze steady, not with a slam, but quietly. Legally, the funds you deposit are yours. We go to the bank this afternoon, we open a new account in your name only, and we transfer the entire balance. It's not an attack. It's simply prudent asset management. He was right. It was the first necessary step. It was a painful thought, financially cutting off my own daughter. But I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting our family's legacy from her husband's greed. It will send a message without declaring all-out war, Darnell continued. It will make them uncomfortable. And you know what, Mr. Bishop, uncomfortable people make mistakes. I looked at the fierce determination in the young man's eyes, the loyalty he held for me and for his father's memory. He was right. It was time to make them uncomfortable. Do it, I said. Darnell and I left the coffee shop and walked 2 blocks to a large impersonal bank downtown, not my usual local branch. Discretion was everything now. The air inside was cool and quiet, smelling of clean carpets and money. We were shown into the bank manager's office, a glass-walled room where everything was polished and orderly. Darnell handled the introductions. He was composed, efficient, laying out the necessary documents with the precision of a surgeon. I watched my own hands as I signed the papers to open a new private account under my name only. My signature was as steady as it had ever been. Then came the final form, the one to authorize the transfer of the entire balance from the joint account I shared with Chloe into my new one. As I pressed the pen to the paper, there was no feeling of triumph. There was only a profound, grim sadness. It felt like I was signing a death certificate for the relationship I once had with my daughter. With a few quiet words and a few clicks of a keyboard, the bank manager executed the transfer. A financial lifeline that had existed for 38 years was severed in less than 5 minutes. The first shot had been fired not with a bang, but with a quiet, decisive click. As the manager was finalizing the transfer, a receipt printing out with a soft whir, I could almost picture the scene unfolding across town. I imagined Chloe was in one of those high-end grocery stores she loves, the kind where everything is organic and costs twice as much. Her cart would be overflowing with expensive cheeses, imported wines, and whatever else caught her fancy. She would be standing at the checkout line, probably texting on her phone, barely paying attention to the young cashier scanning her items. The total would come up a number that would make most people flinch, but she wouldn't even blink. She would hand over her platinum credit card, the one linked directly to the account I had just drained. I could see the cashier swiping it. A pause. A small, confused frown. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the cashier would say. "It's been declined." Chloe's head would snap up from her phone, her face a mask of disbelief. "What? That's impossible. Try it again." The cashier would try again. The same result. A small red light blinking on the machine. declined. I could feel the heat rising in her cheeks as the people in line behind her began to shift impatiently. The public humiliation would be a sharper sting than any private argument. She would storm out, leaving the full cart behind, and immediately call Trevor, her voice a furious, panicked whisper. "Trevor, the card's not working. Something is wrong with Dad's account." I could then picture Trevor sitting in his home office, annoyed at the interruption. He would pull up the bank account online, expecting to see a simple glitch, and then he would see it. Balance $0.00. The initial annoyance would flash to confusion, then to pure, unadulterated rage. The mask of the smooth, confident entrepreneur would be ripped away. He would see the withdrawal transaction authorized by me, and he would understand. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a tantrum. This was an action. This was a move on the chessboard. His fist would slam down on his expensive oak desk, the very picture of a cornered animal. The warning shot had found its mark. The game had just changed, and they were finally starting to realize they weren't the only ones playing. That evening, back in the quiet solitude of my hotel room, I decided it was time. I took the battery and reinserted it into my smartphone. I powered it on. As I expected, the screen exploded with a flurry of notifications. Missed calls from Chloe, dozens of them. A string of increasingly frantic text messages. But I ignored all of them. I was looking for one thing only, a voicemail. And there it was, a notification from an hour ago, from Trevor. I pressed play and put the phone on speaker, the volume low. His voice filled the sterile room, and it was exactly as I had anticipated. It started out smooth as honey dripping with fake concern. "Hey, Ray, it's Trevor. Listen, Chloe and I are... Well, we're really starting to get worried about you. We saw the bank account is empty, and honestly, our first thought was that you're in some kind of trouble. We just want to make sure you're safe. Did someone, take advantage of you? Give us a call. Let us know you're okay. We're just worried sick over here." There was a pause. I could almost hear him waiting, as if he expected me to magically answer a message that had already been left. When I didn't, the mask began to slip. The sweetness curdled into annoyance. "Okay, look, Ray, this isn't funny anymore." His voice shifted, becoming harder. "This is childish. You can't just disappear and drain an account like that. That money was for household expenses. For Chloe. What you did was completely irresponsible, and frankly, it's a mess." Another pause, this one shorter, tighter. And then the final transformation. The concerned son-in-law was gone, replaced by a cold, menacing stranger. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you need to stop it. Now. You're going to call us, and you're going to fix what you did. I want to be very clear with you, Ray. There are legal avenues for families to take when an elderly member is, let's just say, no longer capable of making sound financial decisions. You wouldn't want us to have to go down that road, would you? You wouldn't want a stranger in a black robe to decide if you're fit to manage your own affairs. Think very carefully about that. Call me back." The message ended. He had done it. In his arrogance and his desperation, he had handed me the exact tool I needed. It wasn't a threat to me. It was a gift. I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, hard certainty. I calmly saved the audio file, labeled it Evidence Exhibit A, and forwarded it to Darnell with a simple message. He took the bait. After I sent the file to Darnell, I placed the phone screen down on the nightstand. There was no fear in my heart. No panic. Trevor thought his words were a weapon meant to intimidate me, to scare me back into submission. He couldn't have been more wrong. His message wasn't a threat, it was a confession. It was a clear statement of his intent, a gift-wrapped piece of evidence proving his malicious plan. He was a desperate man acting on impulse and rage, and desperate men are sloppy. They make mistakes. He thought he was cornering a helpless old man. He had no idea he was actually walking into a carefully laid trap. The next morning we met again, not at the coffee shop, but in a small private conference room at Darnell's law firm. It was a formal space with a large mahogany table and leather chairs, a room designed for serious business. The casualness was gone. The game had escalated, and we both knew it. I didn't say a word when I walked in. I simply sat down, took out my smartphone, and placed it on the polished surface of the table between us. Darnell looked at the phone, then at me. His expression was grim. "He contacted you. It wasn't a question." "He did," I confirmed. I found the audio file and pressed play. I didn't put it on speaker this time. I slid the phone across the table to him. I wanted him to hear it directly, to feel the venom in Trevor's voice as if it were whispered in his own ear. Darnell picked up the phone and held it to his ear. I watched his face as he listened. For the first 30 seconds, his expression was one of professional focus, a lawyer analyzing a piece of information. I saw his jaw tighten as Trevor's tone shifted from fake concern to annoyance. Then, as Trevor delivered his final thinly veiled threat about my mental capacity, I saw a change in Darnell's eyes. The professional detachment vanished, replaced by a cold, hard anger. It was the look of a man whose family had just been threatened. He finished listening and placed the phone back on the table with a quiet, deliberate finality. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked something far more dangerous. He looked determined. "That's it," he said, his voice low and firm. "That's the ballgame. This isn't just about protecting your assets anymore, Mr. Bishop. This is a declaration of war. He threatened you. He threatened to use the legal system to strip you of your rights for his own financial gain. This moves beyond a family dispute. This is now a case of attempted elder abuse and financial exploitation." He leaned back in his chair, but his posture was anything but relaxed. It was coiled, ready to strike. "They've made a fatal mistake," he said. "They thought they were dealing with your father. They have no idea they're about to be dealing with mine." Darnell stood up and began to pace the small conference room, not with nervous energy, but like a caged tiger. "Trevor's voicemail changed everything, Mr. Bishop. My initial plan was to build a simple defensive wall around your assets, a legal fortress like you said, quiet, clean, and purely protective. But what he did, that threat, that's an act of aggression. He's telling us he intends to attack you with the most vicious tool he can think of, questioning your sanity in a court of law. A quiet defense is no longer enough. When someone brings a knife to a fight, you don't bring a shield, you bring a cannon." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression deadly serious. "I'm a good lawyer, sir. I can handle contracts, trusts, and estates with the best of them. But this is about to get ugly. This is going to be a street fight in a courtroom. And for that, we need a specialist. We need the senior partner of my firm." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Her name is Imani Vance, and she is without a doubt the toughest, smartest, and most feared litigator in this city. She doesn't just practice law, she wages it. She's the lawyer other lawyers have nightmares about. Her specialty is complex corporate litigation and hostile takeovers. But what she's really known for is protecting her clients with a ferocity that is frankly terrifying to witness if you're on the other side. She can take a threat like Trevor's and not just neutralize it, but turn it back on him so powerfully that he'll regret the day he ever learned how to speak." Darnell walked over to the window, looking down at the street below. "Bringing in Ms. Vance it's a significant escalation. It's like calling in an airstrike. She's expensive, she's demanding, and she does not suffer fools. But when she takes a case, she does not lose. Trevor and your daughter think they can bully an old man. They think they can file a simple petition and have you declared incompetent. What they don't expect is to walk into a courtroom and find themselves facing off against a legal shark like Imani Vance. She won't just defeat them, Mr. Bishop. She will dismantle them, their arguments, and their credibility piece by piece until there is nothing left. The question is," he turned back to me, his eyes searching mine, "are you ready for that kind of fight?" An hour later, I was sitting in a different conference room. This one was on the top floor of the building with a panoramic view of the city that I had helped build. The table was a single massive slab of dark polished wood. The chairs were black leather that sighed when you sat in them. Everything in the room was designed to make you feel small, to remind you that you were in a place of immense power. Darnell sat beside me, looking a little less confident than he had in his own office. Then the door opened and Imani Vance walked in. She was not what I expected. She was a tall, elegant black woman, perhaps in her late 50s, wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored suit. She moved with a silent, deliberate grace that commanded the room's attention without a single word. She didn't offer a handshake. She simply sat down opposite me, placed a single slim file on the table, and looked at me. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and completely unreadable. It felt like being assessed by a hawk. "Mr. Bishop," she began, her voice a low, perfectly modulated alto. "Darnell has given me the broad strokes. He's also played me your son-in-law's unfortunate voicemail. But I don't deal in broad strokes. I deal in intent. So I have a few questions for you." I nodded. "I understand." "Good," she said. "First, why now? You've been subsidizing your daughter and her husband for years. You've tolerated their disrespect. Why draw the line at the house? Why not just give it to them? You're 70 years old. You could sign the papers and live the rest of your life in peace. It was a test. She wasn't asking for information. She was testing my resolve. Peace is not the same as quiet, Ms. Vance. I answered, my voice steady. I have been quiet for a long time, and it has brought me no peace. It has only invited more aggression. They didn't ask for my home. They demanded it. They didn't see it as my legacy. They saw it as their next acquisition. My peace is not for sale. She held my gaze, her expression unchanging. This will get ugly. They will stand up in a court of law and call you senile. They will paint you as a spiteful, vindictive old man who has lost his mind. They will use every loving thing you ever did for your daughter and twist it into an example of your declining mental state. Are you prepared to have your entire life, your character dissected and vilified in public by your only child? I thought of Vivian. I thought of my promise. My character has been vilified in private at my own dinner table, Ms. Vance. I see no difference in doing it under oath. At least in a courtroom I will be allowed to respond. A flicker of something, perhaps respect, appeared in her eyes for a brief moment before vanishing. She had one final question. What is your end game here, Mr. Bishop? Tell me what you want. Is this about punishing them? Is it revenge? I leaned forward slightly. Revenge is a fool's game. It's an emotional reaction. This is not emotional. This is a structural correction. My son-in-law is a reckless gambler who sees my family's legacy as his personal stack of poker chips. My daughter is his willing accomplice. My endgame is to protect the foundation my wife and I built from those who would see it crumble. I don't want to destroy my daughter. I want to save our legacy from her. There is a difference. I finished speaking and leaned back. The silence in the room was absolute. Imani Vance looked at me, then at Darnell, then back at me. A slow, thin smile touched her lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just identified a worthy hunt. All right, Mr. Bishop, she said, closing the file. I'll take your case. We are no longer on the defensive. As of this moment, we are on the attack. Darnell, get our private investigative team on the phone. I want a full financial and personal workup on one Trevor Miller. I want to know every dollar he owes, every bad deal he's made, and every skeleton in his closet. We are going to bury him in his own mistakes. I didn't hear from Darnell or Ms. Vance for the next 72 hours. It was a period of intense, disciplined silence. I stayed in my hotel room reading old paperback novels and drinking bad coffee, trusting that the machine I had set in motion was now operating at full capacity. Darnell later described to me what happened during those 3 days, and it was a whirlwind of relentless, quiet efficiency. The investigation began not with a bang, but with the soft clicking of keyboards in a darkened room. Imani Vance's in-house investigative team, a group of forensic accountants and former private investigators, descended upon Trevor Miller's life like a pack of digital wolves. I pictured a young, brilliant analyst, his face illuminated only by the glow of 6 different monitors, untangling the snarled mess of Trevor's finances. He would have followed the money trail from legitimate bank loans to high-risk cryptocurrency exchanges, then into the murky worlds of online gambling and failed penny stocks. A river of borrowed money flowing in one direction downhill. Red flags would have popped up on his screen one after another, each one representing a desperate, foolish bet. At the same time, I imagined a grizzled ex-cop in a cluttered office, a man who specialized in digging up the past. He would be making quiet phone calls to old business associates of Trevor's in other states. He would be pulling public records, searching for liens, bankruptcies, and lawsuits. A pattern would begin to emerge, a history of grandiose promises and catastrophic failures, of burned partners and abandoned projects. The charming entrepreneur my daughter saw was in reality a serial failure who had run out of other people's money to burn. Back at the law firm, Darnell told me he and 2 other junior associates were buried in the firm's massive library. They were scouring case law, looking for legal precedents, building the framework for their attack. They weren't just looking for ways to defend me, they were looking for ways to legally dismantle Trevor's entire life. And at the center of it all, I pictured Imani Vance. She stood in her corner office before a massive whiteboard, the city lights twinkling behind her. The information flowed to her from all directions: financial data, personal history, legal precedents. She was the general in the war room, connecting lines, circling names, mapping out the strategy. She wasn't just collecting facts. She was building a cage. Each piece of information they uncovered was another steel bar, and soon that cage would be ready for the unsuspecting animal who had no idea he was being hunted. The call came on the fourth day. It was Imani Vance herself. Her voice on the phone was the same as it was in person, calm, precise, and leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Mr. Bishop," she said, "we have what we need. Please come to my office at 4 o'clock." And she hung up. When I arrived, the atmosphere was different. Darnell was there, but he was silent, deferring completely to his boss. Ms. Vance didn't ask me how I was. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She gestured for me to sit, and on the large conference table she had laid out a single thin file. It looked insignificant, but I knew it contained the ammunition we were looking for. "Our team has completed its initial workup on your son-in-law, Trevor Miller," she began, her voice as sharp and clean as cut glass. "And the situation is far worse and therefore far better for us than we initially anticipated." She slid a single piece of paper across the table to me. It was a summary sheet filled with names of lenders and numbers that made my head spin. "Trevor is not just an unsuccessful investor, Mr. Bishop. He is a desperate man on the brink of total financial collapse. His so-called AI venture isn't his primary concern. It was a last-ditch effort to raise capital to cover his other, more immediate problems." She tapped the paper. "He has maxed out 23 credit cards. He has 2 outstanding personal loans from high-interest predatory lenders. He has defaulted on his car payments for the last 3 months. But this," she pointed to a final highlighted number, "is the kill shot. He owes nearly $250,000 to a private debt holdings company in Delaware. It's a hard money loan due in 60 days. If he defaults on that, they will financially ruin him for the rest of his life. Your house was never seed money for a new company. It was the bailout he needed to stop himself from drowning." I looked at the staggering list of debts, the portrait of a man consumed by his own greed and incompetence. "He is not a wolf," Mr. Bishop, Imani said, her eyes meeting mine with a cold fire. "He is a cornered rat, and now we know exactly where his cage is." I sat back, letting the cold, hard facts of Trevor's desperation settle over me. For a moment I almost felt a flicker of pity for the man. He was in over his head, flailing in a sea of his own making. But then I remembered the look in his eyes at my dinner table, the smug satisfaction as my daughter told me to shut up. The pity vanished, replaced by a cold resolve. Imani Vance let the silence hang in the air for a moment before she spoke again, her voice precise and deadly. "Now we have a choice," she said, folding her hands on the table. "We can wait for him to make his move. He will file a petition to have you declared incompetent. We will fight it. We will win. Your testimony, Darnell's testimony, and the evidence in this voicemail will ensure that. But it will be a public, messy, and painful process. It will drag your family's name through the mud. It will force Chloe to testify against you. It is a war of attrition, and while we would win both sides, would leave the battlefield wounded." She paused, letting me absorb the grim reality of that path. "Or," she continued, a dangerous glint in her eye, "we can choose a different path. We don't want to win in court, Mr. Bishop. We want to ensure we never have to go to court in the first place. We want to end this before it truly begins." I leaned forward. "How?" "We shift the battlefield," she said. "Right now he sees this as a family dispute. We are going to turn it into a corporate transaction. His biggest vulnerability is not his ego or his failed app. It's that $250,000 loan from the private debt company in Delaware. It's an anchor around his neck. My proposal is this. We use the capital within Bishop Legacy Holdings, operating through a series of anonymous shell corporations, to purchase that debt." I stared at her, the audacity of the plan taking my breath away. "You want me to become his creditor?" "Precisely," she said. "We become the entity that holds the power of his financial life or death in our hands. It's a silent legal corporate maneuver that is virtually untraceable back to you. The moment we acquire the debt, we can legally call it in. All of it. Immediately. A man who is suddenly facing immediate bankruptcy and financial ruin has neither the time, the money, nor the legal standing to pursue a frivolous and baseless claim against a family member. We don't just neutralize his threat. We take his weapon and his entire arsenal away from him permanently. It was a brilliant, ruthless strategy, but it felt aggressive, predatory even. For a second I hesitated. Was this who I was? And then as clear as day I heard Vivian's voice in my head. It was from years ago when a rival contractor tried to underbid me unfairly on a big job. I was angry, ready to confront him head on. But Vivian had calmed me down. "Don't ever fight them on their terms, Ray," she had said, her hand on my arm. "Don't play their dirty game. Change the battlefield until it's one you designed, one you control completely." I looked across the table at Imani Vance. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a strategist just like my Vivian had been. This wasn't a dirty game. This was changing the battlefield, this was taking control. I met Ms. Vance's gaze, my hesitation gone. "Do it," I said. "Buy his debt." The plan was set, and with a final firm nod from me, Imani Vance put her machine into motion. The days that followed were a masterclass in silent corporate warfare. A series of moves made in the quiet hum of servers and the rustle of legal documents. Darnell later walked me through the steps, and even in his telling it felt less like a legal maneuver and more like a covert military operation. It began with a single massive wire transfer. I pictured the screen in a secure accounting office, a string of numbers moving from a Bishop Legacy Holdings account into a newly created escrow. The transaction would have been flagged and reviewed by the bank, but Imani's firm had already prepared the necessary paperwork. It was all legitimate, all meticulously documented. A significant portion of the fortress I had built with Vivian was now being mobilized, transformed from a defensive structure into a precision-guided weapon. Next came the creation of the intermediary. In the space of a single afternoon, a new corporate entity was born. I imagined a young paralegal swiftly navigating a state registration website, filing the articles of incorporation. They gave it a name so bland, it was practically invisible: North Star Capital Ventures, LLC. It had no office, no employees, no history. It was a ghost, a legal vessel created for a single purpose. Its registered agent was a third-party service in a different state, another layer of anonymity, another dead end for anyone trying to trace its origin. All of its official correspondence would be routed through Imani's firm, but her name and mine appeared nowhere on its official documents. Then came the offer. I pictured a formal letter being drafted on heavy, expensive letterhead, bearing the anonymous name of North Star Capital Ventures. The language would have been stripped of all emotion, a cold, clinical business proposal. It would have been sent via secure courier to the private debt holdings company in Delaware. The letter would make a simple, clean offer to purchase the outstanding promissory note for one Trevor Miller in full, for a small premium above its current value. It was an all-cash offer with a promise to close the transaction within 48 hours. To the Delaware company, this was a gift from heaven. They were in the business of lending money and collecting interest, not in the messy, time-consuming business of chasing down desperate defaulters like Trevor. Our offer wasn't just a good deal, it was a clean exit. The wait for their response was the hardest part, but it was short. An encrypted email arrived the next morning. The subject line was simple: re-offer for note number 734B. The body of the email was even simpler. "We accept your offer. Please find the closing documents attached. Wire transfer instructions are on page 3. The final transaction was the quietest of all. Another silent wire transfer, this time from North Star Capital Ventures to the Delaware firm. And in return, a digital file was transferred to a secure server controlled by Imani's team. It was a simple PDF document, a digital copy of the promissory note signed by Trevor. It contained his signature, his promises, and his obligations. It was his financial ball and chain. And the legal ownership of that chain now belonged to me. The trap was set. The weapon was forged. And the man who thought he was the hunter had no idea that the battlefield had been reshaped around him, and that he was now and forever would be the prey. The trap was set. All that remained was to invite the prey to walk into it. Darnell told me later that Imani Vance drafted the invitation herself, treating each word with the same care a poet would give a sonnet. I can picture her in her office late one night, the city lights spread out beneath her like a conquered kingdom. She wouldn't have used a computer at first. She would have used a heavy fountain pen and a yellow legal pad, wanting to feel the weight and texture of each word as she wrote it down. The letter was a masterpiece of strategic ambiguity. It was addressed to both Chloe and Trevor. It began with formal conciliatory language. On behalf of our client, Mr. Raymond Bishop, she would have written, and in the interest of finding an amicable family resolution. The word amicable was the first piece of cheese on the trap. It suggested negotiation, a willingness to compromise. She would have continued inviting them to a formal meeting to discuss the future management and orderly transition of the Bishop family estate, particularly in consideration of Mr. Bishop's advanced age and recent health concerns. Every phrase was a carefully chosen poison pellet coated in sugar. Orderly transition would sound to them like a surrender. Advanced age and health concerns would be a direct confirmation that their threat had landed, that I was a scared old man worried about being declared incompetent. The letter was designed to appeal to their two greatest weaknesses, their greed and their arrogance. It wasn't an invitation to a legal meeting. It was a formal invitation to their own downfall, and they wouldn't see it coming for a second. I can just picture the moment the courier arrived at my house, a place that was no longer my home. A uniformed driver would have handed Trevor a crisp, important-looking envelope from a top-tier law firm. Trevor would have taken it, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. He would have opened it with a letter opener, still pretending he was some kind of business tycoon. He would have read the first sentence, his brow furrowed in concentration. And then, as he continued to read, I can see the slow, smug, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "We've got him," he would have said, tossing the letter onto the kitchen island for Chloe to read. "The old man is finally breaking." I knew he would. Chloe would have picked it up, her eyes scanning the page. I can hear her sigh of relief, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. "Oh, thank God," she would say. "I told you he was just being dramatic. Amicable family resolution. He's ready to sign the house over. It's even better than that," Trevor would gloat, pointing to a line in the letter. "See this, considering Mr. Bishop's advanced age and health concerns." Our little voicemail worked perfectly. He's terrified we're going to take him to court and have him declared senile. He's waving the white flag. There would be no remorse in their voices, no concern for the father they had pushed to this point, only the giddy thrill of victory. They would see the meeting not as a negotiation, but as a formality, a surrender ceremony where they would be crowned the victors. "He wants to meet at his lawyer's office," Chloe would have noted. "Of course he does," Trevor would scoff. "He wants to feel like he has some power left." "Let him. It doesn't matter where we sign the papers as long as they get signed." He would wrap his arms around his wife, a conquering hero. "Go pick out your best suit, honey," he'd say, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We have an inheritance to collect." They would have opened a bottle of wine that night to celebrate, completely blind to the fact that they weren't celebrating a victory. They were toasting their own execution. The day of the meeting arrived. It was a crisp, clear autumn morning. I chose to wear my Sunday best, a simple, dark gray suit that Vivian had bought for me years ago. It was the suit I had worn to my best friend Marcus's funeral. It felt appropriate. It was a suit for serious, somber occasions. Darnell picked me up and we drove to the law firm in a comfortable silence. When we walked into Imani Vance's top-floor conference room, she was already there, standing by the large window looking out at the city. She turned as we entered, and the look on her face was not one of a lawyer, but of a general inspecting her troops before a battle. She gave a single sharp nod. We were ready. We sat on one side of the massive table. In front of her was a single slim folder for each of us. The room was silent, the only sound the distant hum of the city below. We were 5 minutes early. Chloe and Trevor arrived 10 minutes late. It was a deliberate power move, a final petty display of their perceived dominance. They swept into the room not with the gravity the situation required, but with the breezy arrogance of a couple arriving at their own party. Trevor wore an expensive-looking blue suit that was just a little too shiny, a confident smirk plastered on his face. Chloe was in a bright, stylish dress carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than my first car. She looked triumphant, like a princess who had finally been promised her kingdom. She briefly met my eyes, and there was no shame, no guilt, only a cold, dismissive flicker of victory. They took their seats opposite us. Trevor casually tossed his leather briefcase on the chair beside him and leaned back, spreading his arms as if he owned the room. "All right," he said with a magnanimous smile, addressing Imani as if she were a waitress. "Let's get this over with. We have lunch reservations." The contrast between the two sides of the table was a chasm. Our side was still silent, composed. Their side was filled with a restless, flashy, and utterly misplaced confidence. They thought they were here to accept a surrender. They had no idea they were sitting on the executioner's block. Imani Vance let Trevor's comment about lunch reservations hang in the air for a moment, letting its arrogance and disrespect settle over the room like a fine dust. She didn't acknowledge it. She simply placed her hands flat on the table, a gesture that drew all the energy in the room directly to her. The meeting had begun. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice calm and cool, filling the silent room. "We have convened this meeting as stated in our letter to provide clarity regarding the future management of the Bishop family estate. We will proceed in an orderly fashion, beginning with the primary asset in question, the residential property located at 123 Oak Street." She looked directly at Chloe and Trevor, her expression unreadable. "I believe you are operating under the impression that this meeting was called to discuss the terms of a potential transfer of this property from Mr. Bishop to you. Is that correct?" Trevor leaned forward, his smug smile returning. "That's our understanding. Yes. A transfer, an inheritance. We're flexible on the terminology." Amani's face remained a blank mask. "Thank you for that clarification. Then let us begin by correcting a fundamental error in your understanding. First, a point of legal fact. The property at 123 Oak Street is not and has not been for over 30 years the personal property of Mr. Raymond Bishop." A flicker of confusion crossed Trevor's face. Chloe frowned. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Of course it's his house." Amani ignored her and continued as if she hadn't spoken. "As of August 19, 1992, the deed for the property was legally and formally transferred to a private holding company, Bishop Legacy Holdings, LLC, of which Mr. Bishop and his late wife Vivian Bishop were the sole managing members. Mr. Bishop has resided there as a tenant of the corporation he controls." The smugness was gone from Trevor's face, now replaced by a wary, calculating look. He was starting to realize this was not the meeting he had prepared for. As the surviving managing member of the LLC, Amani went on, her voice never changing its flat professional tone. "Mr. Bishop has recently undertaken a significant restructuring of the company's assets. This restructuring is designed to better reflect his and his late wife's long-term philanthropic intentions. To that end, as of last Tuesday at 9 a.m., the property at 123 Oak Street was permanently transferred out of the holding company and placed into a newly formed irrevocable charitable trust." She paused for a beat, letting the legal weight of the words sink in. "The trust is named the Vivian Bishop Legacy Foundation." Chloe's mouth opened slightly, a look of utter bewilderment on her face. "A foundation? What foundation?" Imani continued, her focus unwavering. "The foundation's stated and legally binding mission is to provide vocational training and apprenticeships in the building trades, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work for underprivileged youth in this community. The house itself, which Mr. Bishop built, will serve as the foundation's headquarters and its primary hands-on training facility." She then delivered the final crushing blow. "As I'm sure your husband can explain to you, Chloe, the term irrevocable has a very specific and absolute legal meaning. It means the trust is final. It cannot be altered, contested, or dissolved by any party, including Mr. Bishop himself. The property is now permanently owned by the foundation. It is no longer a family asset in any sense of the word." I watched the color drain from my daughter's face. I watched Trevor's eyes dart around the room, his mind scrambling, searching for an angle, a loophole, and finding nothing but solid walls. Amani wasn't finished. She reached into her slim folder and pulled out a single document. She slid it across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Trevor. "This brings us to the final point on this matter, your current residency. As you are living without a lease on a property that is now legally owned by the foundation, your tenancy is no longer authorized." Her voice was as cold and hard as a judge's gavel. "This is a formal, legally binding eviction notice. It gives you 30 calendar days to vacate the premises so that the Vivian Bishop Legacy Foundation can begin its important work. All necessary filings have been made with the county clerk's office. The clock, as they say, is ticking." The eviction notice sat in the middle of the table, a stark white rectangle on the dark wood. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. The silence was finally broken by a small choked sound from my daughter. "What?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. She looked from the paper to Amani, then to me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning, childlike horror. "No." "Dad, what is she talking about? A foundation eviction. This is our home. This is my home." She turned to me, her voice rising with panicked desperation. "Dad, tell her to stop. This is some kind of horrible joke. Tell them to stop." I remained silent, my heart aching for the daughter I used to know, the one who had been lost somewhere along the way. Before I could even think of a response, Trevor exploded. He shot up from his chair so violently that it scraped loudly against the floor, rocking on its legs. His face was a mask of crimson fury. He pointed a shaking finger not at me, but at Imani. "You can't do this," he snarled. "This is illegal. This is coercion. You're a predatory lawyer who has clearly taken advantage of a confused old man. We'll have you disbarred." Imani didn't even blink. She just watched him, her expression as placid as a frozen lake. His rage finding no purchase on her icy calm, then swiveled to me. "Ray, have you completely lost your mind?" he yelled, his voice echoing in the pristine conference room. "Are you really going to kick your own daughter, your only child, out onto the street? After everything we've done for you, we've been living there taking care of you, taking care of the house." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his lie hung in the air. He was just getting started. He began pacing behind his chair, a caged animal spitting threats. "This is elder abuse. That's what this is. We will fight this in court. We will contest this trust. We'll have you declared mentally incompetent. No judge in the country is going to let you throw your own family into the street. We will drain every last cent from that ridiculous foundation of yours in legal fees. You will regret this." He was wild, unhinged, his carefully constructed facade of the calm, successful businessman utterly shattered. All that was left was the desperate, greedy child underneath. Beside me, Darnell sat perfectly still, and across the table, Imani Vance watched the meltdown with a detached clinical interest like a scientist observing a chemical reaction. She let him scream. She let him threaten. She let him exhaust himself, exposing his true, violent nature for all to see. When Trevor finally ran out of breath, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat, Imani Vance let the silence stretch out thick and heavy. She waited until his ragged breathing was the only sound in the room. She hadn't moved a muscle. She hadn't flinched. She simply waited, a predator allowing its prey to tire itself out completely. Then she spoke, and her voice, still calm, still level, cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "Are you finished?" she asked, a genuine clinical question. Before Trevor could sputter another response, she continued, "Good, because your performance, while theatrical, is both irrelevant and based on a false premise. You are assuming a legal battle over Mr. Bishop's mental state. That is not what this meeting is about. We are not here to discuss Mr. Bishop's health. We are here to discuss your own." She reached into her folder and pulled out a second, thicker stack of documents. She didn't slide these across the table. She dropped them. The heavy thud echoed like a gavel. "Let us move on to the second matter of business," she said, her eyes locking onto Trevor's. "Your personal finances." Trevor stared at the stack of papers, a sudden cold dread creeping into his eyes. "My finances. My finances have nothing to do with this." "Oh, but they do, Mr. Miller," Imani said. "They have everything to do with this. As of a week ago, you had numerous outstanding liabilities. Credit cards, personal loans, and one particularly large high-interest note from a private debt holdings company in Delaware. A note for $242,000 due in less than 60 days. A note you had absolutely no way of paying." She let him process that she knew the intimate details of his financial ruin. "You see, Mr. Miller, when you threatened our client, you gave us cause to investigate your motives. And your motive was not concern for your father-in-law. It was desperation. You needed this house not as an investment, but as a lifeline, a bailout to save you from your own catastrophic financial decisions." Chloe looked at her husband, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "Trevor, what is she talking about? $250,000. Trevor ignored her. He stared at Imani, his mind racing. "So what? You looked into my finances. That's an invasion of privacy. It proves nothing." "It proves motive," Imani corrected him, her voice like ice. "But you're right. Simply knowing about your debt wasn't enough. So we decided to take a more active role in the matter." She gestured to the pile of documents. "That is a copy of your original loan agreement with Wilmington Debt Holdings. And on top of it, you will find a legally executed transfer of ownership document dated 3 days ago. A new investment entity, North Star Capital Ventures, has purchased your debt in full. They are now your sole creditor for your largest and most dangerous liability." She leaned forward slightly, the final act of the play about to be delivered. And Mr. Miller, she said, her voice dropping into a low, chilling register, I am the legal representative for North Star Capital Ventures, which means, as of this moment, you don't owe them. You owe me. For the second time, a profound, shattering silence fell over the room. Trevor stared at her, his mouth slightly open, the full, horrifying weight of his situation finally crashing down on him. The legal threats, the petitions, the fight for the house, all of it was a meaningless sideshow. He hadn't been playing a game against a tired old man. He had been playing a game against her, and he had just discovered that she owned the entire board. Chloe looked from Imani's cold, triumphant face to her husband's ashen, terrified one. The fury and entitlement drained away from her, replaced by a wave of sickening understanding. The man she had admired, the man she had defended, the man for whom she had disrespected her own father, was a fraud, a failure, a man who had gambled everything and lost. She made a small, wounded sound like a cry and buried her face in her hands. The first sob was quiet, but it was followed by another and another, each one racking her body with the full force of her catastrophic mistake. Trevor didn't seem to notice his wife's breakdown. He just sank slowly back into his chair, his body deflating as if his bones had suddenly turned to dust. The rage was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the hollow, empty shell of a defeated man. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, searching for a lifeline. He found none. He had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for foolishness. And now, in the ruins of his own making, he was finally seeing me for the first time. Yet, observer at my own execution and subsequent resurrection. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, and looked directly at the man who had tried to destroy me. My voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was calm and clear and final. You wanted my money to start a business, Trevor, I said. So I decided to invest. Not in your fantasy app, but in the own. It was at that moment that I chose to speak. I had been silent for the entire meeting, a real thing you've ever actually produced. I paused, letting him feel the weight of my words. I've invested in your debt. I am your business now. And I am telling you, it's time to pay what you owe. My words hung in the air, a final verdict. Imani Vance took that as her cue to deliver the coup de grace. She looked at Trevor, whose head was now bowed in total defeat. And that brings us to our final point, she said, her voice devoid of any sympathy. Given the explicit threat you made against our client in your voicemail, a threat to maliciously question his mental competence for financial gain, we have, as of this morning, filed for an emergency protective order on Mr. Bishop's behalf. She slid one last piece of paper across the table. This is a temporary restraining order signed by a judge. It legally prohibits you and your wife from contacting, harassing, or coming within 500 feet of Mr. Bishop. Any attempt to communicate with him, a phone call, a text message, an email, will be considered a direct violation and will result in your immediate arrest. That was the final blow. The last sliver of hope. The idea that they could somehow appeal to me, apologize, beg for forgiveness was extinguished. I was legally walled off from them. The fortress was complete. Trevor didn't say a word. He just stared at the restraining order, a piece of paper that represented the total and complete end of his plans. Chloe's quiet sobs turned into raw, ragged wails of despair. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for the house, for the money, for the comfortable life she had just lost. The meeting was over. There was nothing left to say. They had come here expecting a coronation. Instead, they had attended their own funeral. 6 months later, I was standing on the front porch of what used to be my house. I didn't live here anymore. I had a small, quiet apartment on the other side of town that suited me just fine, but I came by once a week. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of saws, hammers, and the laughter of teenagers. The Vivian Bishop Legacy Foundation was in full swing. Inside, a group of kids who had been told they had no future were learning how to build one, their hands, learning the same trades that had built my own life. Darnell pulled up in his car and walked up the steps to join me. He handed me a letter. It was from Chloe. One of a dozen she had sent over the months, all of them unopened. I didn't need to read them. I knew what they said. Apologies, regrets, pleas for a second chance. Maybe one day, years from now, a new relationship could be built. But it would have to be built on a new foundation, a foundation of respect. Darnell and I stood there for a moment watching the kids work. "Vivian would have loved this," he said quietly. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "I know," I said. "Legacy isn't what you leave for people, it's what you leave inside of them." I had walked away from the life they had tried to trap me in, and in doing so, I had finally, truly come home. I had been silent for the entire meeting, a quiet observer at my own execution and subsequent resurrection. Trevor's eyes, filled with a desperate, pleading terror, finally locked onto mine. He was searching for a crack in my armor, a hint of the soft-hearted old man he thought he knew. He found nothing. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool, polished wood of the table, and I finally spoke. My voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was as quiet and as heavy as the soil on a fresh grave. "You wanted my money, Trevor," I began, my words dropping into the silent room like stones into a deep well. "You saw the fruits of a lifetime of hard work, of calloused hands and sleepless nights, and you thought you could just take it. You thought you could use it to fund your shortcuts and your schemes. Your mistake was thinking that my legacy was just a house and a bank account. You saw the assets, but you never saw the sweat. You never saw the sacrifice. You never saw my Vivian staying up until midnight going over the books after she had already worked a full day." I let that sink in, letting him feel the weight of the life he had so casually disrespected. "But sitting here, I've decided you've given me a new business idea," I continued, my voice cold and precise. "So, I'm going to make an investment, not in your fantasy app. I'm investing in the only real tangible thing you've ever managed to produce." I paused, holding his gaze. "I've invested in your failure. I own your debt, Trevor. That is my business now. And I am telling you, it is time to pay what you owe. Not just the money, everything." My final words hung in the air, a sentence passed down not from a judge but from a father. Imani Vance took that as her cue to deliver the final crushing blow, the one that would salt the earth of their defeat and ensure nothing could ever grow there again. She looked at Trevor, whose head was now bowed in total submission, and then her gaze shifted to my weeping daughter. Her voice remained utterly devoid of sympathy. "And that brings us to our final point," she said, as if concluding a standard business negotiation. "Given the explicit and recorded threat you made against our client, Mr. Miller, a threat to maliciously question his mental competence for the sole purpose of financial gain, we have, as of this morning, taken the necessary steps to ensure Mr. Bishop's physical and emotional safety moving forward." She reached into her folder one last time and pulled out the final document. It was stamped with the seal of the county court. "This is a temporary but legally binding restraining order signed by Judge Eleanor Mathis. It legally prohibits both you and your wife, Chloe Bishop Miller, from contacting, harassing, or coming within 500 feet of Mr. Bishop. Any attempt to communicate with him, a phone call, a text message, an email, or approaching him in person, will be considered a direct violation of a court order and will result in your immediate arrest. If buying the debt was a strategic masterstroke, this was a simple, brutal act of finality. It wasn't just a financial wall, it was a physical and legal one. It was the final, heartbreaking proof that our relationship was over. The last desperate hope they might have had of somehow appealing to me, of apologizing, of begging for forgiveness, was legally extinguished. Trevor didn't even seem to have the energy to react. He just stared at the document, a piece of paper that represented the total annihilation of his plans and his future. He was a hollowed-out shell, the arrogant man from an hour ago, completely gone, replaced by a ghost. "But Chloe..." Chloe's quiet sobs turned into a raw, ragged wail of utter despair. It was the sound of a soul breaking. She finally lifted her head, her face streaked with tears and makeup, and looked at me. Her eyes were no longer cold or triumphant. They were the eyes of a lost little girl finally horribly understanding the full magnitude of what she had done. She had not just lost a house or an allowance. She had lost her father. The restraining order was a legal declaration that the door to my life, the one that had always been open to her, was now closed, locked, and bolted. Imani Vance stood up, her movement signaling the end. "This meeting is adjourned," she said quietly. Darnell and I rose with her. I did not look at my daughter again. I couldn't. The wall had to be built, and it had to be strong. We turned and walked out of the conference room. our footsteps silent on the thick carpet, leaving Chloe and Trevor alone at the massive empty table surrounded by the ruins of the life they had tried to steal and the one they had just destroyed. This whole ordeal taught me a painful but powerful lesson. For years I confused my love as a father with endless giving, and in doing so I allowed my generosity to be mistaken for weakness. I learned that true fatherhood isn't just about providing for your children, it's about teaching them accountability and demanding respect. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to finally stop shielding their children from the consequences of their own actions. My worth was never in the house or the money. It was in the dignity I finally reclaimed for myself and for the memory of my wife. What do you think? Did I do the right thing or did I go too far? I would be honored to read your honest opinions in the comments below.